Paul say something similar. 1 Timothy, who's the pastor of the church of Ephesus, said this. He says, "For there is one God, one mediator between God and mankind, the man Jesus Christ." Now, again, we can read this. We can read this as Bible. We can read this as religious literature. But I want you to read this from as written by a man who, in order to say that, had to change his very core beliefs of everything he'd been raised in, and going, no, there's one God. Well, he believed that, and one mediator, and he combined those two together, and he says it's Jesus. Not the law, it's Jesus. Paul had always believed God. Paul was a teacher, a scholar, a rabbi, a leader of the Jewish synagogues. And what's fascinating to me is that Rome didn't mind him teaching about God. Rome didn't squash the Jewish temple. In fact, they funded it and for it being rebuilt. They didn't mind the Jews adding another god to the list. They didn't mind at all. In fact, they promoted the Pharisees. You see this. You see the correlation between the Pharisees and the scholars and the religious teachers and Pilate, and you see the interaction between them. And it wasn't, they weren't afraid. They ran to Pilate and said, "You put him to death." But yet, Jesus was polarizing. That the moment that Paul began to confess that Jesus is God, all of a sudden his life was in danger, and all of a sudden he would be imprisoned, and all of a sudden he would be killed, eventually killed, for proclaiming this. For proclaiming there's one God, one mediator, and his name is Jesus. And isn't it amazing today that there's freedoms and people are talking about freedoms for all sorts of things. We're fighting for freedoms and all the rest of it. And yet, the moment you mention Christian or Jesus is polarizing. Why? It's interesting. C.S. Lewis, he wrote this. C.S. Lewis was a Oxford scholar, a popular author, such works like the Narnia series and others. And C.S. Lewis, by the way, was an atheist most of his life. And yet, this is what C.S. Lewis said on a BBC radio interview. He said this, "That's the one thing we must not say." What's the one thing must not say? They're saying, well, Jesus was just a good man. Jesus was just a good teacher. He says, we cannot say that. A man who is merely a man and said the sort of things Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He would either be a lunatic on the level with a man who says he is a poached egg, or else he would be the devil of hell. Then he says, you must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman or something worse. You can shut him up for a fool, you can spit at him and kill him as a demon, or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. But let us not come with any patronizing nonsense about this being merely a great human teacher. He has not left that open to us. He did not intend to. Wow. Jesus is a polarizing figure. But as C.S. Lewis said, Jesus forces every single one of us to make a choice. That we have to choose that either he is a liar, he was a lunatic, or he is God. And C.S. Lewis said you just cannot be indifferent. You can't study all the historical facts. You can't put all this together. You can't listen to all of his teachings and say he's a good moral teacher. You have a choice to make. And C.S. Lewis, this is the former atheist. This is how he concluded this statement. He said, now it seems to me obvious that he was neither a lunatic nor a fiend, and consequently however strange or terrifying or unlikely it may seem, I have to accept the view that he was and is God. No matter how strange or terrifying, see, we try to wrap our heads around it. And listen, you don't have to check your brain at the door to be a Christian. In fact, I challenge you not to. Question everything. Study everything. Study science and how it either proves or disproves Christianity. Come on, we don't have to check it at the door and just blindly believe. Study history and see that Jesus really existed. These events actually happened. Like he said, study it out. But when you do that, it's still your brain cannot fathom the fact that how in the world did God come in human form? And is Jesus, all the evidence, everything is there. How? It's strange, terrifying, unlikely, all of those things. And yet, as C.S. Lewis said, I have a choice. C.S. Lewis made his choice that I have to accept the view he was and is God. So what about you? What's your choice? For me, and here's today's takeaway, I've had to accept, no matter how strange, unlikely, terrifying it is, I've had to accept that Jesus is God. And that his resurrection makes it so. And that without the resurrection, this is all useless. My life's been a waste. All the church is useless. Our faith is useless. But with the resurrection, all of this is on purpose for a purpose.